The start of a journey. Walter Carr had been through more in his short 20 years of life than many people experience in an entire lifetime. It wasn't by choice, but fate had a way of testing his resilience. Born in a small town in Louisiana, Walter had always been an optimistic soul, full of dreams, energy, and determination. His family had been everything to him, especially after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, which had stripped away his home and his childhood sense of security. When the storm came, it didn't just destroy buildings, it scattered his family and plans like debris in the wind. After years of struggling, Walter and his mother had decided to start over in Homewood, Alabama, a small town that promised new beginnings. They rented a modest apartment, hoping the calm surroundings would heal their wounds, but things weren't easy. Walter's mother, already frail from years of hardship, struggled to find consistent work. She had become a caretaker for an elderly woman in town, but her health was slowly deteriorating, and the bills piled up faster than they could manage. Despite this, Walter remained steadfast. He wanted nothing more than to provide for her, to give her a sense of stability and peace, but with little money in his pocket and no reliable transportation. Finding work was an uphill battle. That was when Walter heard about a job opening at Bellhops, a local moving company. The position, though physically demanding, seemed like the perfect opportunity for someone like Walter, young, strong, and willing to do whatever it took. The job was located about 20 miles away from his apartment, but Walter wasn't deterred by the distance. If he had learned anything from life's trials, it was that nothing worth having comes easily. Excited and full of hope, Walter gathered up what little he had and made the drive over to Bellhops to apply. The interview went well, and the hiring manager even told him he could start the very next day. But just as Walter was about to leave, his car sputtered and died in the parking lot. A sense of dread washed over him. Of all the days for his old car to give up, why did it have to be today? The car wasn't just a convenience, it was Walter's lifeline. Without it, he couldn't get to the job. He had no money for repairs, no way to call for help, and no one to turn to. His mind raced as he stared at the broken vehicle. How was he supposed to make it to the job he had just been hired for? He didn't give up, though. He didn't even consider it. Walter stood there, breathing in the morning air, as the weight of his situation began to sink in. The world had a way of throwing curveballs, but Walter had learned that his strength lay in how he responded to them. He couldn't afford to quit. He needed this job, needed to provide for his mother, and make sure they didn't fall back into homelessness. Without much thought, Walter made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He would walk the 20 miles to his new job. It wasn't an easy choice, nor a comfortable one, but it was the only option left. Pulling out his phone, Walter mapped the route. The distance was staggering, and it would take him hours to reach his destination on foot, but somehow, despite the exhaustion he already felt just from thinking about it, Walter was undeterred. He was going to make it to Bellhops. That night, Walter went to bed earlier than usual, setting an alarm for 12 a.m. so that he could get a head start. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything he had been through to get to this point. There had been losses and setbacks, moments of despair and loneliness, but through it all, he had never given up. He had refused to let circumstances dictate his future. Tonight, he would prove it again. At the strike of midnight, Walter rose from his bed, lacing up his worn sneakers. He grabbed his jacket, tightened his shoelaces, and stepped outside. The cool night air greeted him, and the quiet streets seemed to hold the weight of his decision. He didn't know exactly what the journey would hold, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to give it everything he had. He took the first step, then the second, then the third, and soon he was walking at a steady pace, the miles ahead of him stretching out like a challenge. For the first few miles, everything seemed relatively normal. The streets were dark and empty, save for the occasional passing car, but Walter kept his head down and focused on the rhythm of his walk. With every step, his muscles began to warm, and he reminded himself that this was the only way forward. There was no turning back. But as the miles wore on, the weight of the journey began to settle into his bones. His legs burned, his feet ached, and sweat dripped down his face, despite the cool night air. At times, his mind would wander, considering the impossibility of the task he had set for himself. But then he thought of his mother, of the struggle they had faced, and of how much she depended on him. He thought of the job, of the future, and of how much was at stake. He had to make it. By the time Walter had reached the halfway point, his legs felt like they might give out beneath him. Each step felt heavier than the last, but still, he pressed on. He thought about his mom, about how close they were to losing everything again, and that thought spurred him forward, even when every fiber of his being screamed for him to stop. He wasn't a quitter, not after everything they had been through. As he walked, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. At first, he didn't think much of it. Cars passed him all the time, their drivers probably unaware of the lone figure on the road. But as the car grew closer, it slowed, and Walter felt a growing sense of unease. The vehicle was moving too slowly, almost as if it were following him. Walter turned his head just slightly, and his heart skipped a beat. The car wasn't passing him at all. It was trailing behind him. He had no idea who it was or why they were following him, but the fact that he was alone on this desolate road, walking at this time of night, suddenly felt more ominous. The car followed for a few more minutes, its headlights shining on the pavement ahead. Walter knew he couldn't stop. Not yet. He had to make it to his destination. Just as Walter began to quicken his pace, trying to ignore the fear building in his chest, the car pulled up alongside him. The headlights shone bright in his eyes, and the sound of a car door opening shattered the silence of the night. "Hey, you!" A voice called out from the car. Walter froze. The unexpected encounter. The voice calling out to Walter was firm, authoritative, but not unkind. It belonged to a man, a police officer, standing in the doorway of a squad car. Walter's heart raced as he glanced up, momentarily blinded by the headlights. The officer had a stern look on his face, his posture rigid and expectant. In the stillness of the night, the sound of the officer's footsteps as he approached seemed to echo louder than they probably were. Walter, his muscles burning from the long trek, instinctively slowed his pace, but kept moving forward. He didn't know what to expect. He could feel the sweat dripping down his back, the strain in his legs intensifying with every step. But despite the fatigue and the sudden tension in the air, Walter knew he couldn't stop now. Not when he was so close to achieving his goal. The officer's car rolled up beside him, and the man behind the wheel rolled the window down. Walter's mind raced, calculating his options. He could ignore the officer, keep walking, and hope he wasn't being detained. Or he could stop, answer the officer's questions, and risk losing precious time that he could never afford to waste. "Where are you headed at this hour?" The officer's voice carried a hint of suspicion, but there was also curiosity in it. Walter could sense that this was not a routine traffic stop. The officer's gaze was intense, trying to gauge whether Walter was in trouble or just an innocent, albeit very unusual, figure on the street. Walter, trying to catch his breath, paused for a brief moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the officer's gaze on him, but the clock was ticking. He couldn't waste any more time talking. The interview, the job, his mother, it all depended on him getting there, and fast. "I'm just trying to get to work, sir," Walter said, his voice strained but determined. He could feel his legs trembling, but he made sure to hold his ground. "I have a job to do, and I can't be late." The officer looked at him for a moment, clearly puzzled. "A job," he repeated, "at this time of night?" "Yes," Walter explained, breathing heavily now, his throat dry from the exertion. "I have to be at Bellhops, the moving company. I'm supposed to help with a move. I don't have a car, so I'm walking." The officer seemed to study him for a moment, his expression softening slightly as he processed the information. But then his eyebrows furrowed again, and he shook his head, still not entirely convinced. 20 miles on foot. That's a long way. What kind of job is so important that you're walking in the middle of the night to get there? Walter could feel the weight of the officer's skepticism pressing down on him. The truth was, he had no idea how to explain the full extent of what he was trying to do. How could he convey the urgency of the situation, the burden of responsibility he carried for his mother, the fear that they could lose everything if he didn't make it? But in that moment, it wasn't just about the job. It wasn't just about the long walk. It was about something deeper, his refusal to let life's obstacles break him, no matter how insurmountable they seemed. Walter had always believed that determination, grit, and heart could make the impossible possible. This was his chance to prove it, not just to the officer, but to himself as well. "I need this job," Walter said, his voice quieter now, but resolute. "My mom, she's depending on me. We can't afford to lose this chance. I have to be there, or we could lose everything again." The officer blinked, the tough exterior beginning to crack as he absorbed Walter's words. It was as if a shift occurred within him, as though the hard edges of his demeanor softened in response to the young man's sincerity. "All right," the officer finally said, his tone changing. "You're walking to work, huh? That's dedication." Walter nodded, but he wasn't sure how much that would matter. Time was still running out, and he didn't know if he could continue on his own much longer. His body was starting to rebel against him, each step feeling more like a punishment than a stride toward victory. The thought of walking another 10 miles, all while explaining his situation to the officer, felt unbearable. The officer watched him for another moment, as though weighing the situation. Then, unexpectedly, he shifted his car into gear and rolled forward. Walter's heart sank. Was he being ordered to stop? Was he going to be detained for something? But the officer surprised him. He motioned for Walter to approach the car, his voice now more understanding than before. "Look, you've got a long way to go. I can't just let you walk the rest of the way in the middle of the night. Let me give you a ride." Walter's mind raced. A ride? The officer was offering to help him. It seemed too good to be true. Was this some sort of trick? He hadn't expected kindness from a stranger, especially not a police officer. But here it was, a lifeline, a glimmer of hope that he didn't know he would find on this grueling journey. He hesitated for a moment, unsure. His instincts screamed at him to keep walking, to not lose a single second, but something in the officer's tone told him this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. "Are you sure?" Walter asked, his voice wavering slightly. The exhaustion was starting to catch up with him, making his decision harder than it should have been. "I don't want to take your time." The officer waved off his concern, a small smile forming at the corners of his lips. "No need to worry about that. I'm not in a hurry. You've already done most of the work. I'll take you as far as I can, at least until you're closer to where you need to be." With that, Walter's heart swelled with relief. The officer's willingness to help him felt like a small miracle. He didn't realize how much he needed the kindness of a stranger until that very moment. The officer's generosity was a reminder that even in a world that often felt harsh, there were still people who cared enough to step up when it mattered most. Walter stepped forward, cautiously, and slid into the passenger seat. The cool air inside the car was a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of his exhaustion. For a few moments, they drove in silence, the streetlights flickering as the car made its way through the quiet night. As the miles passed, Walter began to feel the tension of the day's struggle melt away. The officer, whom he'd only met moments before, seemed to understand the gravity of his situation. Without needing to say much more, they both knew that this wasn't just about a ride. It was about helping someone who refused to give up, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. And for the first time in hours, Walter allowed himself to relax, just a little. He had made it this far, and with the officer's help, he might just make it all the way. But the story wasn't over yet. The final chapter of Walter's journey was still to come, and the surprises waiting for him would change everything. A helping hand, As the car rolled smoothly through the quiet streets of Homewood, Walter allowed himself to breathe a little easier, though the journey was far from over. The officer, who had introduced himself as Officer Sean Gray, seemed to sense Walter's anxiety and kept the conversation light, even offering a few words of encouragement. Despite the comfort of the ride, Walter couldn't shake the nagging feeling that time was still slipping away, that every moment he wasn't working was a moment his hopes of securing this job could fade into the distance. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was full of unspoken words. The officer occasionally glanced at Walter, sensing the young man's fatigue, but also his determination. He had seen a lot in his years on the force. Unfortunate situations, people making poor choices, some looking for an easy way out. But this was different. There was something about Walter's unwavering resolve that caught his attention. It was more than just ambition or desperation. It was a quiet, steely commitment to a better life, not just for himself, but for someone he loved. As they drove on, the neighborhood began to change. The houses became more spaced out, larger, and soon they reached the outskirts of the town. Walter could see the first streaks of dawn beginning to pierce the dark sky, painting it with shades of violet and pink. Despite the pain in his legs and the growing weight of his eyelids, there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel grateful for this unexpected turn of events. "You're doing something most people would never even consider," Officer Gray said after a few minutes of silence, his voice breaking the quiet hum of the car's engine. Walter glanced at the officer, unsure how to respond. I have to do it. For my mom. For us." "Yeah, I get that." Officer Gray nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen a lot of folks give up when things get tough. But you're still going. Most wouldn't have the guts to walk that far, especially in the middle of the night." Respect. Walter didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being praised for his efforts, especially not by a stranger. But something about Officer Gray's words touched him. It was as if, in that moment, someone truly understood the weight of his struggle, the sacrifice he had made in deciding to walk those 20 miles instead of giving up. The car eventually slowed down as they entered a residential area. Walter's heart skipped a beat as he realized they were nearing the last stretch of his journey. The destination was just up ahead, and despite the toll it had taken on him, he could see the end in sight. He didn't know how much more he could endure, but he knew he was so close. "Almost there," Officer Gray said with a smile, glancing at the road signs. "This is where I drop you off. The rest is up to you, my friend." Walter nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as the enormity of the situation hit him. This wasn't just a ride to work. This was a symbol of how far people could go when they didn't quit, how much a little kindness could mean when everything else seemed impossible. Officer Gray had become a beacon of hope, a reminder that in the world's darkest moments, there could still be light. As the car came to a halt in front of a modest house, Walter felt a surge of relief flood his chest. He had made it. It was just a few more steps to the front door, but he had done it. He had walked 14 miles on foot, had been helped along the way by a stranger, and was now standing at the threshold of a new beginning. The officer's car stopped, and he turned to Walter, his expression softening. "Go ahead, get out there. You've earned it." Walter opened the door and stepped out, feeling the weight of his body shift as he stood on solid ground again. His legs still ached, his feet felt like they might be raw, but the relief of having arrived was more than enough to carry him the rest of the way. "Thank you again, Officer Gray. I won't forget this," Walter said, turning to the officer who had offered him a hand when he needed it most. Officer Gray gave him a small nod, his lips curling into a smile. "You're welcome, but you're the one who deserves credit. Keep going. Whatever happens today, you've already proven you've got what it takes." With that, the officer drove off, leaving Walter standing on the sidewalk in front of a house that was both a literal and figurative destination. The homeowner, a woman named Jenny Hayden Lummy, had been expecting the movers to arrive early in the morning, But when she opened the door to see Walter standing there, looking worn, tired, but still standing, her surprise was evident. "Are you the mover?" Jenny asked, still processing what she was seeing. She wasn't used to seeing someone so determined, especially at such an early hour. Walter gave her a tired but genuine smile, nodding. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Walter. I'm here to help." Jenny's eyes widened, clearly taken aback by the young man's dedication. She had heard about people who worked hard, but this was something else entirely. She couldn't quite believe the story Walter had shared with her. The story of a young man who, after facing so many setbacks, had refused to let a broken-down car stand in his way. It was the kind of determination that sparked something in Jenny's heart. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside to allow him into the house. "You must be exhausted. Let's get started, and we'll take it easy. You've already done more than enough." Walter was too tired to say much more, but his heart swelled with gratitude. The job was just beginning, but the journey had already taught him something vital, that with the right mindset, anything was possible, no matter how impossible it might seem. As Walter began to help carry boxes, lifting and packing them into the truck, he could feel every inch of his body protesting. But he didn't stop. Even when he was offered a break, he declined. The adrenaline of having made it this far pushed him forward, step by step, box by box. In the hours that followed, more of the bellhop's crew arrived to help with the move. They were all impressed when they heard Walter's story, and Jenny, inspired by his determination, took to Facebook to share what she had witnessed. She wrote, "Yesterday was a long day, but a good day. Chris and I woke up around 5:45 a.m. to get everything staged and ready for the movers. The doorbell rang at 6:30 a.m., and to our surprise, it wasn't the crew. We had a young man named Walter who had walked over 14 miles in the middle of the night just to help us move. I've never met anyone so dedicated. He didn't let anything stop him. The least we could do was share his story. Please, let's all give him a little encouragement. This young man is the true definition of perseverance." The post went viral, spreading across social media like wildfire, and soon Walter's story reached thousands of people. Messages of support poured in, people from all over offering words of encouragement, admiration, and even donations to help with the repairs for Walter's car. But more than the attention or the donations, what Walter gained that day was something far more precious. The realization that his perseverance had already won the respect of others, and in doing so, he had not only changed his own life, but he had touched the hearts of everyone who learned about his journey. And for the first time in a long time, Walter knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he wasn't walking it alone. The true reward. As the day came to a close and the move was complete, Walter stood in the front yard of the house, sweat soaking his clothes and exhaustion weighing heavily on his shoulders. Yet despite the physical toll of the long walk, the heavy lifting, and the never-ending task of the move itself, he couldn't help but smile. The job had been done, and in the end, he had made it, not just to his destination, but to something far more meaningful. As Walter climbed back into the officer's car that had helped him along the way, he realized that his journey was never just about getting from point A to point B. It wasn't even about the job or the paycheck, although those were important. No, Walter's journey had been about something deeper, about proving to himself that no matter the obstacles in his path, he could overcome them if he just kept moving forward. That morning, Walter had received more than just the help of a stranger. He had received a powerful lesson in kindness, perseverance, and the strength of the human spirit. The officer's unexpected act of generosity had reminded Walter that the world, despite its challenges and hardships, still had people willing to lend a hand when it mattered most. It was a reminder that while the world could be difficult, there were moments of grace that made the struggle worthwhile. Walter's story spread far and wide, not because of his walk or the hardship he faced, but because of the pure heart behind it. His determination and resilience captured the attention of people who admired his work ethic and his refusal to give up, even when everything seemed stacked against him. It wasn't just about what he had accomplished that day. It was about the lesson he had imparted to all who followed his journey. In the days that followed, Walter's story continued to inspire countless people. Donations came in to help repair his car, and people offered him not only financial support, but also job opportunities and words of encouragement. But for Walter, the true reward wasn't the material help. It was the knowledge that his persistence, his unwavering belief that he could do something no matter the odds, had made a real impact on others. He had become a living testament to the power of perseverance and the ripple effect that one person's actions can have on the world. That day, when Walter finally finished his work, he didn't just feel physically exhausted. He felt alive, as though he had finally found the strength to face any challenge, to push through any obstacle. And as he walked back to his apartment, feeling the weight of his body but not his spirit, Walter knew that no matter what life threw at him in the future, he would always carry with him the lessons he had learned from that long walk. Life wasn't always going to be easy, but that was never the point. The point was to keep going, to believe that even the toughest days could be turned into something meaningful with enough heart, grit, and a willingness to keep moving forward. And sometimes, in the most unexpected of moments, life would surprise you, offering help when you least expected it, but only if you had the courage to keep walking toward your goal. In the end, Walter's story was a reminder for us all that no matter how impossible a situation might seem, if we hold on to our purpose and stay determined, the world has a way of rewarding that effort, even if it comes from places we didn't expect. The power of perseverance is not just in the finish line. It's in every step we take, no matter how hard or long the journey may be. And in Walter's case, that journey had already changed everything. No matter the challenges you face, never give up. Your effort, your resilience, and your heart will always carry you further than you think. And when the road gets tough, remember, sometimes the kindness of a stranger and the strength within yourself are all you need to make it through.